I'm Heather Dunaway-Smith. I'm an interdisciplinary interactive artist. I blend illustration, animation, interaction, and audio, including music, into immersive art experiences. Specifically, I make augmented reality and virtual reality, also known as XR, or extended reality. This is the sort of stuff that I make.
Something's not right. Just out of the corner of my eye, falling under veil of sea, sunk to the bottom, tucked beneath the rocks and leaves. How happy I'd be to know that you.
Thank you for joining me today. In this session, you will learn the following: best practices for designing AR experiences, tools and tips for thinking spatially during the design process, interaction techniques for creating authenticity and agency, and last, how to use sound in immersive experiences. We are witnessing the birth of a new medium, which is not something that happens every day. And when a new medium arrives, it tends to copy the mediums that existed before it. So for example, when cinema arrived, it essentially copied theater. So all of the shots were super drawn back and shot wide and as though they existed on a stage, like with a proscenium. And it wasn't until years later and lots of work that people realized there really was no proscenium in film. And on top of that, there were unique things that film could do to tell a story, stuff like jump cuts and close-ups, stuff that wasn't available in theater. And those are now the defining features of what we think of as cinematography, or how to tell a story via film. And we're at a similar crux with augmented reality right now. So we don't know what AR is really capable of, or how best to use it, or how to tell a story with it. But we know that we'll get there as long as lots and lots of artists make lots and lots of work. And that's where you come in, and also Adobe Aero. Adobe Aero is one of the first pieces of AR software that allows you to create experiences without coding at all, which is a big deal. Previously, in order to create AR, you had to have really extensive technical background, as well as possibly a team of developers at your side. But that's not the case anymore. You can make AR art as an individual, which is really exciting. In order for this medium to evolve, we need everyone's stories, not just those with a technical background. So, let's get started. This is a bird's eye view of the AR design process. I always start with sketches and storyboards. From there, I make physical prototypes, where I test my initial ideas. Then it's time to actually design and build the assets. I bring everything into Adobe Aero and set up a spatial layout. I add interactions, animations, and finally it's time to test and share it with others. I always start with sketching and storyboarding. I love to draw, so this is one of my favorite parts, but I also get to really let my imagination run wild. This is also the step where I take the time to define and plan out the user flow, so how a participant will move through the experience and what interactions I'll use. After I have that all laid out, it's time to move on to prototyping. Specifically with XR or AR, it's really important to prototype. I find that even if you have a really solid idea, you won't actually understand how it works until you try it yourself with your own body. So the way that I do this is I use Adobe Aero, which has a bunch of pre-built assets, so it takes 0 time to build, and I set up the interactions or the types of layouts that I have in mind, and then I actually test it in physical space. And that helps me find problems, come up with new ideas, and actually just in general have a much deeper sense of how the experience will feel from the very beginning. These are some examples of early prototypes I created for the Musical Amusements project. So I started with a question, which was, what if amusement park rides were alive? And then I created a series of experiments to test different game mechanics and rides that were typically present at amusement parks. So I did whack-a-mole, a personal favorite. I also tried ring toss, and I ultimately tried a roller coaster where You stand still, but the roller coaster moves around you. And that's a pretty good example of the flexibility that we have with augmented reality. We can take experiences that we all know and love and really turn them on their head because anything is possible. After you've got your basic functionality sorted out and you're happy with your prototype, it's time to actually design and build your assets. You can do this in Photoshop, you could do this in After Effects. Personally, I tend to design on my iPad, then I bring everything into After Effects where I'll create 2D animations. I'll make my 3D meshes, typically in Blender, along with animations and materials, and then I export everything and I bring it into Adobe Aero. Now it's time to set up the spatial layout, basically the 3D world that your participant is going to be inhabiting. I'm just dragging and dropping 3D models that I've exported as GLB files and 2D animations that I've exported as a ping sequence and then zipped up. I'm now going to position, rotate, and scale using the Properties panel in the lower right-hand corner or the toolbar on the left-hand side. Now it's time to add animations and interactions. I will get into the nitty-gritty of how to set up behaviors in a second, but for now, just know that this is the part of the process where I typically activate animations that I have created in other applications, and also add animations within Aero itself. One example of this is the clouds. I'm going to move them over a long period of time using Aero's animation tools, and this is going to create a subtle bob up and down. I'm also going to activate the animations I created in After Effects, and by combining these two types of animations, I'm going to add authenticity to my world. This is also the part of the process where I add all of my interactions, so if I want something to respond to a user's tap or when they get close, this is the point of the process where I do that. Once you've set up your layout and your interactions and you've tested and you're happy with the experience, it's time to share with everybody else. And Aero makes it really easy. Just go up to the share icon in the upper right-hand corner and then select Create Link. This is going to create both a URL and a QR code. And if you ever need to manage these, click on Manage Shared Links. Another option is to select Export. This will create a .real file that you can save on your hard drive. When your audience views your AR experience, it's going to be on a mobile device, so either a tablet or a phone. And these devices are pretty small. They only have a certain amount of screen real estate to deal with, also known as a viewport. So you really have to think about your composition in terms of framing, especially the initial frame. In other words, the very first thing that your audience sees when they launch your experience. One of the techniques that I use to deal with this is by setting a focal point a few feet in front of a participant. Then I adjust the positioning and the scale until I think I've got the composition just right, and then I test it in physical space. You want your initial impression to be a good one. So if your framing is off or you've scaled something so large and close to a person that it's blocking their view, they might feel disoriented or not sure where to look. This is another reason why prototyping is absolutely essential when you're doing AR. I find that you really can't successfully imagine what these interactions or compositions are really going to feel or look like, so you have to try them in physical space. So another thing to consider is the fact that mobile devices don't have a ton of processing power. When they create these AR experiences, we're honestly asking them to do a lot, like track multiple planes, juggle substantial animations and interactions, proximity triggers, 3D models and their animations. It's honestly a lot. So we really have to optimize from the very beginning. And here are some tips and techniques for doing just that. Keep your file dimensions as small as possible while maintaining fidelity. And for 3D objects, make sure that their scale is appropriate. For 2D objects, I never go larger than 2048 by 2048, but honestly, that's pretty big. I try to keep it in like the 1024 zone. Compression is your new best friend. If you have a graphic image with flat colors and a transparent background, a ping might be the best bet. If you have something that has a lot of photographic detail or texture, then a JPEG might be better. Play around until you find what works for you. Due to the way that computers read data, it's often a really good technique to use power of two images. What these are is images that either have a 1:1 or 2:1 aspect ratio, where one or both of the sides is an interval, so either 256 or 1024 or 2048 by 2048. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be given modern technologies, but it's still a really good optimization technique. I try to keep my frame rates as low as possible while maintaining a nice smooth action. So when you create 2D animation and bring it into Aero, it's going to be done as either an animated GIF or a ping sequence. And what that is every single frame within an animation is exported as an individual ping file, and it adds up really, really quickly. So you got to make sure that they count. Personally, I find that I hit in the 12 to 16 frames per second range, and it seems to work pretty well for me. Finally, you really have to keep an eye on overall project size. Personally, I try to keep my Aero experiences less than 50 megabytes. And this is because if they get too large, it can be really, really hard for these mobile devices to process the files, especially older devices. And you want to make sure that as many people as possible can experience your art. Okay, let's talk spatial design. In my experience, the only way to really wrap your brain around a spatial composition is to try it in space. I know I've said that a lot, but it's really true. And the way that you do this is through prototyping in the early stages and then testing throughout the development process, just to make sure that compositions are working. Again, when you're creating something in space, you need to try it from multiple angles to make sure that the composition works from those multiple viewpoints. I have a checklist. I go front, behind, left, right, top, and bottom. Things like scale and positioning are actually really hard to intuit. So putting them in the physical space and just seeing it for yourself is totally the way to go. I also think about the fact that a person of a certain height is going to be experiencing your art. So when I place objects, I think about, are they going to be above or below, or maybe right at eye level with the average human height? You want to make sure that things are framed for a person. I find time and time again that user testing is totally invaluable. My very patient friends and family have helped me out on this front countless times. Basically, I give them the experience with very little information, and then I just stand back and I watch, and I take notes about where they seemed confused, where they seemed excited, and then later I ask them questions, and hopefully you'll gain some really interesting insights that way. And if not, it's still typically a lot of fun. First thing is first, you have to know how to navigate around a 3D environment. In Aero on the desktop, there are multiple tools that you can use to do this. The first one is Orbit, aka Rotate. It allows you to rotate around an object, and you can use this tool or use the number 1 on your keyboard. The second tool is Pan, which allows you to go left, right, up, or down, and you can access it via this icon or by hitting the number 2 on your keyboard. The third tool is Dolly, aka Zoom. So you can zoom in and out of your objects easily, and you can access this by pressing the number 3 on your keyboard or using this icon. In spatial design, it's really important and a little challenging to direct a participant's eye. But when we do so, we reduce cognitive load, we minimize disorientation, we speed up visual processing, and we increase comprehension. So it's a pretty big deal to get this right. Just like other areas of design, there are certain tools and techniques that we can use to make this easier. Things like scale, position, color, movement, and negative space are all at our disposal. Most commonly, I use a blend of all of the above. In 2020, during my AR art residency at Adobe, I created this piece about COVID. Each candle contains a voice of the choir, and when you get close to them, they move aside, literally leading you to the next stage. You arrive at the base of the lungs, they sense your closeness, the roses die and the ribs spread. I then used brightly colored T cells in the center of the composition to pull your attention, and just as you start to focus on the swelling heart behind them, they shoot into the center where they begin to multiply, swirl, and rotate around a glowing flame. On the sides, each lung can be heard barely breathing, which draws you to them. When you get close to them, they wake. The eyes open and a dark red curtain falls as all of the other elements appear. Each lung composition contains interactive elements that use both color and sound to draw you to them. One example is the human fountain. On tap, it springs to life, and the resurrection plant below it unfurls as a hidden melody begins to play. George Lucas once said that sound is half of the experience, and I think he was right. Sound can be treated like an afterthought, but in fact, it's a crucial part of creating presence in these immersive experiences. And also, very importantly, sound is a shortcut to the heart. We all know this intuitively. You can listen to music that has no words in it whatsoever, and you will know the emotional content of that song. Adding audio in Aero is very simple. Just select the object you'd like to attach the sound to, then hit the trigger. I'm going to select tap, and then go to Action, Play Audio. Then select the file folder and select File. This lets you navigate to the MP3 file and select it. If you've already imported an audio file, you can also find it in this drop-down menu here. If you check ambient sound, the location and the volume of the audio clip will be the same throughout the whole experience. This is really good for background sounds or even a soundtrack, but I want this audio attached to the bird, so I'm going to leave this unchecked. That way, when a person gets closer to the bird, it will appear louder. Interaction is one of the things that sets AR apart from other mediums, and I think it's incredibly important for that reason. But of course, I would say that I'm an interactive artist. But let me tell you why. So if you enter an experience and you can tell that it is fundamentally responding to you in like meaningful ways where your influence is really felt, you can't help but feel a sense of ownership over it, and that in this universe, you matter. And I feel like that just leads to like unexpected discoveries and more meaningful connections. There are 3 types of interactions in Aero, also known as triggers. To create them, we use the behavior builder. So select the object, then go to behavior builder, and then hit trigger. This is where we get the 3. The first is start, which is essentially a timer that begins as soon as the project launches. Tap acts just like a button on your computer. When you tap it, something will happen. And inner proximity is based on distance. So when your participant gets close to an object, it will launch a series of behaviors. In this case, let's have it play an animation, for example. And then we will click on inner proximity again and adjust the distance. Personally, I find that 50 to 100 centimeters is a good zone, but it depends on what you're building. When designing these AR interactions, it's really important to think about interactive depth. And by this, I mean creating layers of interactions using a variety of different trigger types and including a blend of active, aka essential interactions, with a bunch of passive, aka optional interactions. Using the other design tools that we talked about earlier, like scale, color, positioning, etc., you can direct the participant to the active interactions to make sure that they find them. But if they decide to get curious and explore the world, they get rewarded with these extra little pieces of storytelling. The Musical Amusements project is a good example of this. When the experience first launches, the only thing the participant sees is a top. When they tap it or approach it, it begins to spin and then rises in the air and reveals the second stage of the experience right at eye level, the whack-a-mole game. When they manage to tap on each of the creatures, they pop up and soon they have a whole menagerie of musical amusements. Each one of these holds a secret interaction. Some things respond to taps and others to proximity, but it's really up to the participant to get curious, explore, and discover all that the world has to offer. Some of the objects contain a blend of interactions. For example, the tents blow a bubble on tap that then begins to orbit the participant indefinitely. The suspended spheres reveal fireworks upon tap that then begin to rotate whenever the participant gets close enough. The whole idea is to create a layered experience where the participant never feels lost about what to do next, but also feels inspired to explore. The most unique and defining feature of augmented reality is the fact that it combines the digital world with the physical one. And there are a few different ways that we can play with this. One important tool is context. So site-specific artwork has always done this, but AR has greatly simplified this process. So you can now create a relationship between the artwork and a specific place or a specific living object, like a tree. This year, I created an Arbor Day piece that leverages the mobile context that AR offers us to create layers of personal and social meaning. Picture frames have been used for centuries to celebrate and commemorate the things that we cherish. My goal with this project was to create a shareable picture frame for our collective home, the Earth, to highlight the trees that we love and admire. You can also use what are called image anchors, and this is essentially an image that is registered as a unique mark that will then launch an experience that's associated with it. I used an image anchor to create this Valentine's Day project. The whole AR experience is launched from the image, so I was able to print that on a variety of objects, essentially creating an AR Valentine's Day card, a t-shirt, and even a piece of AR jewelry. It's really easy to use image anchors in Adobe Aero. All you have to do is head down to the lower right-hand corner where it says Anchors and select Image. It will automatically pop up a file directory where you point it to the image that you'd like to use. The next time you launch the project, it will search for that image before presenting the AR experience, but will also offer you the opportunity to view it without. We are bodies in space, right? And as such, we are instinctively aware of our body in relation to objects. So how near or far an object is, how large or small it is compared to our own size. This is just hardwired into us. And it makes scale and proximity incredibly powerful tools in AR. For example, if I made a digital flood and I place a participant in it, as the waters rise, that will feel like a personal, borderline dangerous experience for that person, even though they're clearly going to be fine. This is another very exciting area in XR development. You can experience things safely that would normally be really risky. But the whole point is that when you have objects or experiences or events that happen next to your body, they take on personal meaning. They just do. And it's one of the most powerful and exciting aspects of AR storytelling, in my opinion. So one of the ways to play with this is by using proximity triggers. If we move towards an object and we realize that as soon as we got close to it, it moved and then scurried away, we know that we caused that interaction. It piques curiosity, leads to more exploration and play, and also is just meaningful. In closing, I will leave you with a suggestion and a question. The first is, don't make assumptions, because there are no boundaries. I caught myself early on having really limited thinking about what AR could or should be. And the truth is, there's such a broad range of use case that I can barely wrap my head around it. AR is going to be used for live compositing, theater, graphic novels, music videos, illustration techniques. If you can think it, you can build it. So I would encourage you to not believe the boundaries, don't make any assumptions, and just let your curiosity guide you. When creating AR experiences, I ask myself at the beginning and throughout the project, could I accomplish this in any other medium? And if so, why use AR? More than a hard rule, this is really a guiding light to make sure that I am using this powerful and unique new medium in the best way possible. Today, we covered best practices for designing AR experiences, tips for thinking spatially during the design process. I showed you some techniques to create interaction, authenticity, and agency, and I also showed you how to use audio to create immersion. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you learned some practical tips as well as some theoretical information that will help you with your next AR creation. In the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about me or see some of my work, these are the places that you can find me online. And you should also check out the Adobe Aero Instagram and Twitter account. There is a developing community of truly inspiring art and artists. You should join us. And thanks for sticking around. Happy making. Bye.